Hey all, so another Spotlight with Context video today, and we are talking about Adam Warlock. He's already generating some pretty significant buzz, and I know that there are going to be a couple very pointed questions in the comments. I will try to address those near the end, but I'm going to focus on the kit itself without some of that speculation first. And so to dive right into the strengths, first thing first, he goes unblockable a lot and he can hold on to that unblockable, yeah, pretty much most of the fight. If you really need to be unblockable on every single hit, you can, yeah, you can definitely manage it if you need to, just with some playstyle adjustments. And so that is obviously very powerful. That can allow him to get around auto block in particular. It gives him easy openings. It is its own kind of utility. The fact that this can also apply to specials means that he can land those specials more easily than most. Really strong ability right there. The other big one is his sovereignty buff, because it makes him immune to Nullify, Fate Seal, Stagger, and basically cancels out Neutralize. It's a big deal. Now, it is important to note that this only applies to Nullify, Fate Seal, and Stagger from champions. And so you are going to have, you're going to have to watch out for nodes if you're playing as Adam. And there are some other ways to deal with his buffs that we'll get to when he's on defense. But yeah, sovereignty is strong. And then the last major thing to talk about as far as a strength is his Stasis Pod. It can definitely be used for some strategic tanking and even healing throughout fights. It takes some getting used to fully capitalize on, but it's a very powerful ability, and we will talk about that a bit later. So, weaknesses, there are champions that can resist unblockable attacks or reduce the ability accuracy of them. I believe if you're reducing the ability accuracy of unblockable effects and he has the sovereignty buff up, he's actually still going to go unblockable, so you'll have to watch out for that. But there are champions that can just flat out block unblockables, like Wiccan comes to mind. They will be that much better against him. And if you can lower buff duration, that is a very strong counter against him. Mojo is very good. Absorbing Man only targets a couple of his buffs, but the unblockable is an important one, so even that can help. Additionally, parts of his kit shut down a little bit when he is power stolen. There aren't a ton of mystics with power steal, but there are some very good ones, and so that helps out. And then Soul Barb specifically is something he is weak to. Right now, that is obviously just on Mordo, but, no prizes for the idea that that may come back sometime in the future. So, let's get into the actual abilities. First off, he is a power gain over time champion. He's going to gain 2.5% of a bar of power each second, so that means that if you are not landing any hits at all, you are going to gain a bar over the course of 40 seconds. So pretty slow, but it does add up over time. And to compensate for that, he does gain a bit less power from actually landing hits. Now, like we mentioned earlier, when his power is stolen, he stops gaining power over time for 12 seconds. So if you are fighting him on defense and you feel like he's throwing too many specials, try using someone with power steal. They can help stem the tide a little bit. But you don't want to use Power Drain or Burn, because that's going to give him an energized passive and is going to overcome that lower natural combat power rate, and then he's going to be gaining quite a bit. And then against non-mystic opponents, his ability power rate cannot be reduced. This means that Wither and Petrify are not going to be able to slow this down. So Spider-Man 2099, Quicksilver, Reed, Void, not great counters, at least to that part of him. So bear with me on this next section, because the sovereignty counter, this isn't even the full thing. There is another screenshot after this I took to make sure that the text didn't get too small. There's a lot here. But the important part, to kind of sum all this up before we go into it, is that you are going to get this counter and you want to keep refreshing it by hitting the opponent over and over and over again and just staying hyper aggro. And the more successful you are at being hyper aggro, the more benefits you get. So that is the core thing underlying the rest of this. So, actually going into it, you start this by landing the second light attack or either the special 1 or 2. And then it is refreshed and it counts up, hence the counterpart, whenever the opponent receives a hit from any source. That may seem like kind of odd wording, but this means that your strikes refresh and increase the counter, and like strikers also refresh and increase the counter. So Adam was built specifically to work very well with strikers, and he does. So if that first hit of the sovereignty counter, the second light attack, or the first hit of the special 1 or 2 breaks the opponent's block, then you are going to get a bonus 10 hits. And it's going to break the opponent's block because if we jump ahead a bullet, you are going to gain an unblockable buff on the first hit. And so that means you can hit into the opponent's block, do medium, light, light, and you will go unblockable before that second light attack lands, allowing you to start this whole process. And like it says, as the sovereignty counter increases, Adam is going to gain these non-stacking buffs. These also last for 2 seconds and follow the same refresh rules. So, when you get to 10 hits in this counter, which reminder, if you block break to start it, which you should pretty much always be doing, then you are going to jump right to 10 hits. Not only do you go unblockable, you get a true damage buff, allowing you to bypass armor and resistances. I do want to clarify this a little bit. This does not mean the opponent does not have resistances. It means that your landed hits ignore their resistances. So Adam does not have damage over time like Incinerate, but if he did, that would still be subject to energy resistance. It's just that the actual hits landed ignore any resistance. Additionally, this is specifically energy and physical resistance. These terms are old enough that it was clear that's what it meant at the time, but I have seen some people confused and thinking that true damage bypasses crit resistance. That is not the case. So just a clarification there. If you get to 20 hits, which just a simple math is going to mean you're going to have to do more than start the counter at 10 and land a full combo. So you're going to have to do some backdrafting here, or you're going to have to combo into a special, or you're going to have to use a striker. You're going to have to do something fancy to get this further than 15. It's not that hard. Adam is quite good at backdrafting. His animations really lend themselves well to it, and that's probably going to be the primary thing you do when you play him. But you are going to have to do it. When you get to 20, you get this massive precision buff. This is pretty close to on par with what Absorbing Man gets when he heavies. It is close to guaranteed critical hits. You will see a lot of yellow numbers if you do this. Keep that going even longer and get to 30 hits and you get a huge Fury buff. I think this is 200% of his base attack rating if I remember correctly. It might be even higher. But yeah, it is a very, very large Fury. And so from that space, from 30 hits to 40, you're going to be hitting like an absolute truck. So when you get to 40, all of these non-stacking buffs go away and the sovereignty counter ends and resets to 0. And you gain a stacking Fury, stacking up to 2, for 60 seconds. So this Fury is smaller, but it's still very large, and it lasts for a very long time. This is your primary payoff. This is why it's worth it to go all the way to 40, because you get that huge Fury from 30 to 40, and then you get this still pretty big Fury for the next full minute. Additionally, the counter and all of these buffs are refreshed and paused while Adam is inside his Stasis Pod, which we'll talk about later, and during either champion's special attacks. So this means that you don't have to worry about not getting to 40 because you were baiting out your opponent's specials. Them throwing their specials actually helps you. Additionally, your specials are going to be a hit from any source, and so they're going to keep ticking this counter up. The flow of the fight is very fast-paced, but it works out extremely well for him. So when you hit 40 and you get that long Fury and you lose all the others, Sovereignty is going to go on cooldown for 10 seconds and you will get a 30-second Sovereignty buff. And then this buff itself is paused while the counter is active. So basically guaranteed you're going to lose 10 seconds off this Sovereignty. But then if you go right back in at that 10-second mark, break your opponent's block and start the cycle again, then you can hold on to this Sovereignty buff throughout that entire counter until you get back to 40 again, and then this Sovereignty buff will come back. So it's honestly pretty trivially easy to have the Sovereignty buff up at all times when Adam is an attacker, and we will go over exactly what that does for him in a second. Now, I mentioned that being aggro, backdrafting, all of those things are extremely good for keeping this counter ticking up. But one thing that you cannot do is you cannot just finish a combo, parry, and then keep going. That would be trivially easy. And so the Sovereignty counter and all those buffs do go away if you stun the opponent with a parry. So as a defender, Adam is obviously not terribly likely to hit you 30 times in rapid succession, or if he does, the fight's probably over by then. And so the way this Sovereignty buff comes online on defense, and note only for 15 seconds instead of 30, is when Adam or his opponent are struck or blocked 20 times. So this is the same basic rules as Warlock's Infection. It's not strictly making contact because this works with non-contact attacks as well, but it's just as long as there are 20 collisions between you and your opponent, whether you're blocking or not. So, the Sovereignty buff cannot stack, so you get the 30 seconds after the one counter ends, and then if you successfully go through the next counter, when that ends, it'll just refresh and you'll have 30 seconds again. This buff cannot have its ability accuracy reduced. That means it cannot be prevented by neutralize. So Tigra, Rintrah, Wiccan, all of them will apply their neutralize effects. So Tigra can keep her senses, Rintrah can gain mystical charges, Wiccan can pause his spells. But they don't actually prevent the Sovereignty buff, and this buff cannot be nullified, staggered, or fate sealed by champions. So again, the by champions description means that if Adam is taking a buffet node, this can be nullified by that. It's just not going to go away when you hit or are hit by an opponent that would nullify you. So while this is active, all of Adam's personal buffs, his regens, his furies, his precisions, all become sovereign buffs, which cannot have their ability accuracy reduced, and therefore neutralize stops preventing them, and he will generally be immune to nullify, stagger, and fate seal caused by champions. So this is obviously a pretty significant shutdown of a lot of the ways that mystics mess with Cosmic's buffs. You do still have a few avenues, such as Mojo's ability to reduce the duration of buffs, but in general, when fighting Adam, I think it is safer to kind of assume he'll have his buffs. It's just that you are going to play around them. A lot of them are offensive, the unblockable, the fury, the precision, and so they're not that dangerous. You're just not going to be able to nullify or stagger away his buffs as food for your mystics. But there are mystics that benefit from buffs just existing on the opponent, like America Chavez or Spidey Supreme, and those characters still do quite well against Adam. The last thing the Sovereignty buff does is that it reduces the ability accuracy of the opponent's parry mastery by 100%. So if you are fighting a defending Adam and he has Sovereignty, don't bother trying to parry unless you have more than 100% ability accuracy. This also means that even if your opponent can block unblockables, you can be a little bit more reckless with an attacking Adam because they're not going to be able to parry. So we kind of mentioned the Stasis Pod earlier. This is a weird mechanic. We'll talk about everything that it does in a second, but for now, just focusing on how you activate it. When Adam is a defender, once per fight, He will activate this after getting to 25%, but you have a 2-second delay. That's very important because the Stasis Pod is annoying on defense, and you do not want it to happen in the middle of your combo. This gives you that time to react to it. Make sure that you're watching for it so that you do react to it, or bad things will happen. And then as an attacker, you get this once per fight by double tapping block. Both times, Stasis Pod lasts for 2 seconds. So, what does the Stasis Pod do? First off, Adam is locked into place and cannot move. This is more than a root. This is, you literally cannot do anything. I don't think this is really spoiling anything, because you can kind of tell if you watch the animations in the deep dive. Adam is stunned inside the pod, under the hood, and that's why he can't do anything. So all incoming damage is reduced by 75%, so you don't usually have to worry about just getting one shot. He's going to instantly regenerate 74% of all incoming damage unless he has a soul barb active, so that's the first thing that Mordo can turn off. Remember that this 74% is subject to being increased by the recovery mastery. It won't get to 100%, but you get back a lot of the damage you take. Lowers the ability accuracy of damaging debuffs, not soul barb, and heal block effects by 100%. This means that if your opponent is hitting into you with, say, like a Black Widow Deadly Origins, or somebody who has debuffs on their special attacks, or you're fighting a tech champion and they try to heal block you while you're in the pod because you obviously cannot block, you're stunned, those effects won't apply unless your opponent has increased ability accuracy. So you have quite a bit of safety. Additionally, even if you had Shock, Incinerate, Cold Snap, or Frostbite on you when you went into the pod, you gain an energy protection buff that makes you immune to all of those. This also lasts for 60 whole seconds, so you can use it to give yourself a pretty good amount of breathing room against these kinds of threats. When you come out of the Stasis Pod, you are invulnerable for a quarter of a second. What this means is not only do you take no damage, this is the same way that Nick is invulnerable when he goes into his second life, and so attacks will miss you. This means that you come out of the pod and you don't have to worry about your opponent being like in the middle of their attack animation so that you can't get out of the way. That attack will just go right through you and then you can hit them. So you have to pay attention to the end of the pod, but you have this little piece of safety so that you shouldn't get wrecked coming out of it once you've practiced this a few times. And then, thankfully, the pod does not stop special 3s. If the opponent uses their special 3, Adam gets none of these benefits. He's immediately knocked out of the pod. So you can't use it to tank that, but you can use it to tank an awful lot of other things. So jumping back to the sovereignty counter for a second, this ability, Master of Souls, while the counter is active, the opponent is taunted, meaning they're more likely to throw their specials and pause that sovereignty counter for you. And then when the cooldown is complete, the opponent gets an Intimidate debuff on them, making them more likely to block, so you can go run in and immediately do a full combo into their block and start the whole process all over again. Good news is this Intimidate goes away when you strike their block, so you don't have to worry about them staying passive. They will then probably come in at you when you're trying to do your whole backdraft thing. So, special attacks. Special 1, while Adam has a personal precision, the final hit inflicts a stun debuff. It's a very short stun debuff. So you're not going to be doing a ton of stun chaining with this, but it's not that hard to get to 20 on the Sovereign counter, which is what gives you the precision. And so this will often guaranteed stun, and that's going to allow you to run right back in and keep your Sovereign counter going. This starts to have some really powerful synergy when you consider that you can backdraft, bait your opponent's specials, then combo into your special one, stun the opponent, run in, do another combo, maybe backdraft, bait another special. As long as the opponent cooperates a little bit with the AI, it's not that hard to get Adam's counter really going. That is the primary risk to him. If the opponent does not play along, then you can lose a lot of these effects. But he has a number of things in his kit really helping you move towards that goal. So, the special 2 doesn't do anything during it, but after this special, Adam goes into the Stasis Pod, and this one is not a once per fight. This can happen as many times as you throw this special. The energy protection buff only lasts 2 seconds, like the other effects, and so this doesn't give you that big window against those Incinerate, Cold Snap, etc., but it is going to allow you to purify some of them off yourself if that's what you need in the fight. And it, of course, gives you all of those other Stasis Pod effects, so you are less likely to have damaging debuffs applied to you, you can't be heal blocked, and you are going to just tank a whole bunch of damage. Plus, while you're in the pod, your Sovereign counter is paused, so you can use this to bait out an opponent's special attack, tank most of it, and then run right back in. Very strong. The special 3 just gives you a non-stacking big ol' Fury. This is separate from the 2 that you can get from completing your Sovereign counter, from getting it all the way up to 40, but it is the same size, so this effectively acts as a third one of those very long Furies, and allows you to do some pretty nuts damage. Adam's signature ability augments the pod even further and gives him a regeneration buff. Again, turned off by Soul Barb, but assuming you don't have a Soul Barb on you somehow while using Adam, 10% of missing health over 2 seconds is pretty strong. Because remember, that's also 10% of missing health plus another 1.5 due to recovery. And during that time, you are not going to be taking a whole lot of damage either, and your Sovereign counter is going to be paused and refreshed. And so it's really easy to integrate repeated uses of his regeneration into the overall loop. The other defensive side of the signature ability, and I mean defensive whether you're using Adam or fighting against him, is that when the opponent strikes into the pod, they have a 100% chance to be stunned. Now, this is again turned off by Soul Barb, and obviously you cannot stun the opponent during their special attacks, so this just applies to basics. But this can be really annoying when Adam's on defense, because he gains power over time, he throws his special too, you're used to punishing specials, you hit into him, but he's in the pod and boom, he stuns you. 2 seconds is often long enough for him to come out of the pod and wreck you before you can recover. So this basically means you have to play more carefully around the pod on defense. It's also very strong for an attacking Adam because it gives him just that much more ease in getting his openings after coming out of the pod when he uses it. It's a very nice little bonus, but this also leaves some room for mystics that can go stun immune fighting into Adam. Hood comes to mind. Stun immunity in general is pretty helpful for trying to stay aggressive against Adam. So moving on to the synergies, these are fairly brief. We have some extra crit rating with some of the Guardians. Lab Rats is going to give extra Fury potency to Adam and Mr. Negative, an extra attack rating to Green Goblin and Anti-Venom on their special 2s. This is mainly impactful for Adam and Green Goblin. Green Goblin's special 2 can hit pretty hard if the stars align, and giving it extra attack rating is pretty darn good for it. And then Adam has massive Furies. Extra Fury potency is really good for him. Infinity Avatars is an interesting one. Adam and Thanos get an extra 8% of base attack rating on any of their hits that deal true damage. Now, I mentioned this in the watch party that I did this last weekend, but this does not mean that they have 8% more attack for these hits. This means the actual hits deal that much more damage. Like, the damage is calculated, and then 8% of base attack is added on to the damage for the hit. For those of you who are familiar with Elsa, this is also how her signature ability works. But yeah, cool little ability that just magnifies all of their hits while they have true damage up. And then the 2 visions are going to do this much more direct damage when they inflict a power burn. With Silver Surfer specifically, when they have more than 4 buffs, they gain an aptitude buff, and this is very good for both of them. Adam obviously mostly has precisions and furies, but Surfer has fury and armor ups, and all of them care about those getting larger. Surfer cares about more unique buffs on himself, more buffs on himself in general. So this is a really solid synergy for both of them. So that's Adam, and let's address the elephant in the room. Oh my god, he's so broken. Are you going to nerf him? And let's immediately calm down. Because the thing is that Adam does look quite strong. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's a 0% chance that he gets rebalanced, because the point of the rebalancing program is that we see what the data says and then make adjustments. As I've said many times before, if Adam gets rebalanced, then he will remain a very powerful character who has almost all of his abilities, maybe all of them and just tuned down slightly, and he will still be one of the best cosmics because that is where we very intentionally aimed him to be. He is quite good. He is going to stay good. Is he too strong? I don't know. I personally think there's a good chance that we did rein him in enough, and I say that kind of admitting that, as with many champions, yeah, there were early drafts of him that were obviously and egregiously busted. That happens. It definitely happened for some of my champions early on in their development. The simple truth is that there are some kinds of kits that are a little bit harder to perfectly balance without very large sample sizes. And some of the abilities in Adam's kit fall into that territory. He is that much harder to perfectly strike the balance. Obviously, you've heard me talk already in this video about how much he cares about the AI playing along. I've said you have to do some fancy things. I've said you have to play him a certain way or the effects just go away. That does imply that he should have a higher ceiling. Whether we put that ceiling exactly where it needs to be relative to how high his skill ask is, I'm not 100% sure. But I do think that there's a good chance that Adam is where he needs to be in power level. And if he's not, then we'll fix it. That's the whole point of it. To reiterate, I think the important thing is that Adam is quite fun to play. I really do enjoy him. He is very powerful. He has some extremely interesting abilities. And he is going to stay powerful. And he's going to keep interesting abilities going forward. So please try to evaluate him in that light. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and let me know in the comments what you're thinking. Hopefully, not all of it is focused on the other videos that you probably are going to see that are going to be talking about the prospect of rebalancing, and hopefully we can talk about, does this character look fun to you? Are you excited to get your hands on him? Where do you want to use him? And then the one other thing I'd like to hear in the comments is something not really related to champion design, honestly. But if you watched my Moondragon video, you'll note that the info page for that character tends to have longer bullet points with a couple ideas in each bullet, but fewer overall bullets. Adam's info page isn't much longer in terms of actual words, but has definitely more individual bullets, most of which are pretty short and simple. And I'm not saying we're always going to do one or the other, because designers have their own preferences and different characters require different things. But I'm just kind of curious if anyone wants to leave a comment, which of those styles is easier for you to digest? Because it is something we discuss internally, and I am open to feedback on that. But again, hope you all enjoyed this, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.